The Galactic Xenobiological Research Station orbiting Kepler 442b had seen many dangerous specimens pass through its reinforced containment fields, but nothing quite like the dragon hatchlings from Pyro 7th. The creatures were supposed to be extinct, casualties of their planet's dying star, until a rescue expedition discovered 3 obsidian eggs buried in cooling magma. Now those eggs had cracked open, and the station's finest xenobiologists were learning a painful lesson about Earth's most enduring myth, made flesh among the stars. Dr. Vexthor, a Krillian with 4 manipulator appendages and 2 centuries of experience, approached the containment chamber with confidence that morning. His reputation preceded him across 12 systems. He had gentled the razor-backed Kelvins of Andromeda's Edge and hand-fed the crystalline serpents of Tau Ceti. Dragon hatchlings, despite their legendary status, were still just frightened infants requiring proper care. The largest hatchling proved him catastrophically wrong. Its jaws clamped onto his primary manipulator with the force of a hydraulic press, needle teeth finding gaps in his protective suit. Vexthor's anguished clicks echoed through the observation deck as emergency medical teams rushed forward. The hatchling released him only when sedative gas flooded the chamber, its golden eyes blazing with primal fury. Over the following week, 12 specialists from 8 different species attempted contact. The Quarian diplomat, whose empathic abilities could soothe a raging star whale, retreated with chemical burns across her translucent skin. The Terragast beastmaster, whose genetic modifications gave him scales and claws to match the hatchling's own, barely escaped with his throat intact. Even the station's AI-guided drones were torn apart, their scattered components marking the hatchlings' territory with mechanical carnage. The 3 dragons, each no larger than a Terran housecat, had transformed their containment unit into an impregnable fortress of smoke, ash, and barely restrained violence. They huddled together in the far corner, the largest sheltering the others, their scales rippling with colors that shifted from obsidian to deep crimson when threatened. Station Command began discussing euthanasia protocols. If the creatures couldn't be studied, couldn't be fed, couldn't even be approached, what purpose did their survival serve? Jonah Reed heard about the problem while mopping the corridor outside Xenobiology Lab 7. He was human, which made him somewhat of a curiosity himself. On a station where his species comprised less than 2% of the population, most aliens found humans fascinating in an unsettling way, too fragile to survive their own death world, yet somehow spreading across the galaxy like persistent weeds. Jonah didn't mind the reputation. He preferred the quiet routine of maintenance work, the simple satisfaction of clean floors and functioning air recyclers. But the dragons bothered him. Not because they were dangerous, but because nobody seemed to understand why they were dangerous. He'd seen the security footage, watched how the hatchlings reacted to each species that approached them. The Krillians moved too fast, their limbs creating threatening shadows. The Quarians smelled wrong, their biochemistry triggering the dragon's predatory instincts. The Terragast tried to establish dominance, and the dragons responded to the challenge with absolute fury. Nobody had simply tried being harmless. Jonah didn't ask permission. He'd learned early in his career that asking permission meant getting refused. Instead, he waited until the night cycle, when the xenobiology department ran on skeleton crews, and let himself into the observation deck with his maintenance override codes. The hatchling's containment chamber lay before him, its reinforced glass scorched and scratched from within. He disabled the emergency protocols, another thing he'd get fired for, if he survived, and opened the chamber door. The temperature differential hit him immediately. The air inside baked to nearly 40 degrees Celsius. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stepped inside, carrying nothing but his mop bucket, now filled with fresh water and strips of raw protein from the station commissary. The largest hatchling raised its head, eyes locking onto him with predatory focus. Smoke curled from its nostrils. The other 2 stirred, flanking their sibling, forming a united front against this new intruder. Jonah could see the tension in their bodies, muscles coiled to strike. He sat down. Just sat cross-legged on the scorched floor and placed the bucket beside him. Then he did nothing. He didn't reach out, didn't make eye contact for more than brief moments, didn't attempt to establish dominance or connection. He simply existed in their space, patient and unthreatening, humming an old Earth song his grandmother had taught him. 15 minutes passed, then 30, The hatchlings remained frozen, watching, waiting for the trap to spring. Jonah's legs cramped. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. He kept humming, kept breathing slowly, kept being nothing more than a warm, calm presence in their territory. The smallest hatchling moved first. Jonah thought of her as she, though he had no idea if dragon hatchlings even had genders, crept forward on silent claws. Her scales shimmered from black to deep purple, a color the scientists hadn't documented yet. She approached the bucket, sniffed the water, then looked at Jonah with eyes that held more intelligence than any animal he'd ever known. "It's okay," he whispered. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Leary, he named her in that moment after his grandmother who'd taught him patience, drank from the bucket. Then, with a decision that would baffle xenobiologists for years to come, she climbed into Jonah's lap and curled up against his chest. Her body was furnace hot, her scales sharp enough to cut, but she tucked her head under his arm with the trust of a creature who'd found something she'd been desperately seeking. Safety. Not dominance. Not submission, but simple, unconditional safety. The other two hatchlings followed within minutes, climbing over each other to press against the strange, soft human who smelled of cleaning chemicals and patience. Jonah sat motionless, hardly daring to breathe, as three creatures that had nearly killed a dozen galactic experts fell asleep in his arms. When the morning shift found them 4 hours later, the station's head xenobiologist could only stare in disbelief. Jonah looked up from his position on the floor, 3 dragon hatchlings draped across him like scaly cats, and shrugged. They just needed someone who wasn't trying to prove anything, he said simply. Humanity's reputation shifted slightly that day. Perhaps they weren't just Death World survivors or persistent colonizers. Perhaps they were something else entirely. A species that understood that sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in domination or knowledge, but in the simple, radical act of patience. And Leary, the smallest dragon hatchling who'd chosen first, never forgot the human who'd taught her species that not all strangers were threats. In the years to come, when the dragons of Pyro 7 became humanity's most trusted allies in the galactic conflicts ahead, historians would trace that alliance back to a janitor and a frightened infant who found courage and gentleness. The galaxy would learn what Earth had always known, that legends aren't born from fire alone, but from the quiet moments when fear transforms into trust.